I'm gonna have to clean out this microphone soon because I only have 3 hours of recording time left.
Oh, I thought you meant like you were gonna have to clean out the microphone because it's filthy. Because you're because your disgusting mouth has been all too close
No.
to it. I have a question for you.
What is your question?
What was it?
What was it?
What was it?
What was it? No one knows.
What's funny about this is we are in the midst of the section of the Dark Descent that is all about like vagueness and weirdness and is anything really going on? And the one story that has the most vague title is also the one story that has the most concrete answer. What was it? An invisible ghoul. It was an invisible ghoul. And there's no question at the end of this story as to whether or not there was an invisible ghoul.
There was just an invisible ghoul.
It was such an actual ghoul that when it died, they had to bury it in the backyard.
Yep.
What was it? A concrete answer. And actually a concrete ghoul because they cast him in plaster and gave him to a museum.
Concrete ghoul, concrete answer, concrete death by gun.
And death by what?
Gun.
No, that's real life. The ghoul died of starvation.
I know.
Oh, can I admit to you something? I was very sad at the end of this story.
So was I.
For like everyone involved. Nobody, even the narrator. The last line of the narration is the guy going, "Well, I'm about to go off on a trip from which I may never return. See you later."
Yep.
And then you know what happened later? Fitz-James O'Brien went away and never returned. Or he did, but he returned and then died.
He returned in a box.
He returned.
He actually didn't return in a box. His box was not returned to his homeland like it was supposed to be returned to.
Well, he was actually cremated.
He was,
in an urn. And he lingered for 7 weeks, dying a slow, painful death. But a slow, painful death that was punctuated by lively and very funny and very loving letters he wrote to his friends so they wouldn't be too upset about him.
He also had a glass of sherry when he died, according to the article that I read.
I spent last night reading tributes that were written about him by his friends and almost crying my eyes out at times because of how much everyone seemed to love and revere and just be so broken up 18 years later about their friend dying. Oh, by the way, I'm Phil.
And I'm Willow.
And it's Del Toro time. It's Del Toro time, and we are back with the... And we are back with The Dark Descent. We are back with David G. Hartwell's The Dark Descent. We are in A Fabulous Formless Darkness, the section of the book that is all stories about what is going on. What was it? It was Fitz-James O'Brien. Was his name actually Fitz-James O'Brien? No, he changed it to that. I think his name was like Danny O'Brien. It was something very Irish.
Yep.
It wasn't Fitz-James. I don't know where he got
Fitz-James is still very Irish.
Fitz-James is very Irish. Michael. He was born Michael O'Brien in Cork, Ireland.
And he was like, I want to be more Irish, actually.
Yeah, he was like, this isn't
I want to be a
enough.
Caricature.
I can't imagine him going like, you know what there's a lot of in this world? Michael O'Briens. You know what there's a lot of in this world in 1826? Michael O'Briens in Cork, Ireland.
Yeah.
And him just being like, Fitz-James is at least a little stranger. He had a bushy mustache that he had for, I guess, most of his life.
He may have had an affair with an English officer's wife.
He may have, and if so, good for him. An Irishman having an affair with an English officer's wife is just a little bit of the stick it to themness that England deserved for what they did to the Irish.
He may have had to flee England because of it.
He may have had to, but it is worth noting that a lot of his life is a bit of a mystery because almost everything written about him was written 18 years after his death because... clearly he just didn't write stuff down about himself. He didn't write about himself. He was fairly private about his life and a little shifty about his life in Ireland before he moved to the States. And also a man who probably tried to he may have been a bit of a yarn spinner about himself. But it was actually 18 years after he died, William Winter, a good friend of his,
that's an awesome name, too.
William Winter, Billy the Winter Man, Billy the Coldman.
Bill went.
Bill Frost.
Bill went where?
Bill went where? What was it?
We don't know.
No, we know exactly. We keep telling you we know exactly what it was. No, he dies and he leaves his letters in like his estate, his like literary estate to two guys, one of whom dies soon after he does, and the other one just is, his friends were either writers or military guys, and no one ever has the time to like put together all of his papers and writings. And Fitz-James O'Brien wrote for everyone, for Harper's, for like, for just every magazine and newspaper you can imagine. He was writing constantly.
You would think that he would have financial stability because of that, but from what I read, he did not, because he spent all of his money on his friends as soon as he got it.
He had an inheritance of that, like $8,000 that he
blew through in 2 years in London.
Which he talks about. He would talk to his friends about that, but he was kind of he was an artist. Like, he was a transient artist. He slept on his friends' couches.
It sounded like he fit into both high society and also not high society.
Well, I think it helps that he was in his prime. He was super handsome, according to all of his friends, and B, he was redonkulously smart. I mean, so smart. And to read these tributes, so this guy William Winter, he starts putting together. He's like, gosh, he had family who was going to put together a collection of his writings. They were never able to get to it. So William Winter's like, we've got to do this. All of his friends are dying now. Like, everyone's getting old. Everyone's starting to die. A lot of them were military guys, so they were sick or injured anyway. A lot of them were writers, and they were like starving to death or dying of illnesses and syphilis and things like that. So I've got to put this together. And he sends out a letter to everyone he can find who knew him, and was like, I'm putting together this thing. Can you just send me some reminiscences about him? It's been 18 years, but anything you can remember. And he gets a bunch of responses, and he just publishes them in their entirety in this book, some of the best ones. And if you want to get your hands on, I mean, you can read it for free in the Internet Archive. It's there's a reproduction of it. It's called The Poems and Stories of Fitz-James O'Brien, William Winter, published in 1881. And I was just so taken by one of the guys is like, oh my God, it's been 18 years. I mean, I barely knew the guy. I'll tell you what I can. Goes on for like 10 pages. Just like, from the second he first published something in our magazine until the day he died, I considered him a friend. What a great guy. From what I can tell, though, when he was in money, he was great. When he didn't have money, he was kind of a pain in the butt to be around. I guess he had something of a reputation for being kind of a hard guy to be around at times. I think he was probably pretty depressed a lot.
I mean, that's a pretty standard, like, symptom of depression is money troubles. You blow through it all when you're at your high. Maybe you blow through it all when you're at your high, and then you're at your low again, and just it's kind of an endless wave. And you spend it all on your friends. Yep. Because you want them to know that you love them.
Yep, and I think that's what people got from him. They were just like, he was hard to be around at times. Apparently he was also ripped. Like, he was like a gymnast. They're like, the guy was super strong. He was a gymnast. Before that was like a popular thing to be. He was a devoted, like, when he moves to America, he becomes super patriotic. As soon as we go into the Civil War, he's like, sign me up, put me on the front. I want to fight. I'm an abolitionist. I believe in the Union. I want to fight for this country. I'm going to go out there, and I'll probably die. And he does eventually die.
He doesn't eventually die. He dies fairly early on.
But not before getting commendations. People who, like, his commanding officers were like, this guy was the best. He died, like, not in an official duel, but in a one-on-one with the opposing, like, general or lieutenant. Like, they shot at each other.
He won.
Well, for a while.
Yeah, well, but he took down his enemy.
Yeah.
His last story, he published a couple of things while he was at war.
Yeah.
I think his last story was about a soldier who was writing a letter to his, like, lover, about how he lost an arm, but everyone else was, like, doing worse, so it was okay. Trying to, like, reassure her. And that's, like, really sad because of how he died.
He gets shot. The bullet goes completely through his shoulder, his left shoulder. He doesn't get any medical attention at first because he's leading his men. And finally, they're like, dude, you're passing out and falling off your horse. Please go get some medical help. He gets taken to Maryland. He's in Maryland, or gets taken there to somebody's home. The doctors are like, you'll be fine.
Terrible doctors.
And he lays in bed for a while. Finally, like, they're like, oh, it looks like actually like your entire bone is in pieces. There's like bits of bone all throughout. We're gonna have to operate and reconstruct your shoulder in the 1800s. It's an incredibly long, incredibly painful surgery and surgeries. The surgeons, he's in pain for the entire time he's there. Eventually, he gets tetanus. And he writes to his friends. He's like, I have tetanus. I'm not bouncing back from. I'm probably not bouncing back from this. If I do, I'll see you the rosy side of dawn. But otherwise, I'm just gonna keep writing. And don't worry about me. I'm doing great. I had a good life. And I'm reading the stuff that he wrote, and it's brilliant. Like, the guy's a beautiful writer.
Yeah.
Just. I read a bunch of his poetry in this collection, and I was just like, oh my God, like, apparently he was also a really good reader. They were like, he would just pick up other people's works.
He found editing really boring, though.
But also, nobody knew when he wrote. Yeah. They were like, he would be like drinking all night and hanging out all day, and then he'd be like, oh, I wrote this poem yesterday, and we'd read it, and he refused. He was a perfectionist. So they're like, when did he do all this? We don't know when he wrote, but he managed to do it. And he would write at people's homes, and we'd be like, oh yeah, I remember when he wrote this poem. He wrote it at my house.
He was a playwright too.
Oh right, he had a super successful play.
Yeah,
like, I think the most popular comedy at the time.
Yep.
Was written by him. And the reason I found all this because I was reading the Wikipedia page on his life, and I was like, there's no citations in this. Or there's like 3. But that's impossible. And I started looking around, and I was like, all I'm finding is like the same people who clearly just read the Wikipedia page writing about him. So I get this book, and I read the introduction, I read these letters, and I'm like, oh, because this is the only source.
Yeah.
Like, and I sent to you, and you found his obituary.
Yeah.
I also found his college. Like, they had like a yearly like yearbook about like, where are they now, called The Shield. And they wrote a thing like The Shield, the quarterly magazine, it not just from his college, it was his fraternity.
Yeah.
The Theta Delta Chi published a quarterly magazine, and by magazine, of course, like a 500-page. And in 1897,
a quarterly novel.
A quarterly novel, because that's the way things worked. 1897-98, they wrote about him. A really nice, like, he contributed to the Lantern. He wrote poems and sketches for the Home Journal, published occasional matter for the New York Times, the Evening Post, the American Whig Review. Because he was also a journalist. He was a journalist. And that's one of the things that made putting together this collection of his so hard, was because in addition to having to read everything he wrote, you had to find everything he wrote. And you had to get permission to reprint everything he wrote. So there's a lot of stuff. And he
published some stuff anonymously, right?
There's some stuff that had no byline. So you had to like write to the editors and be like, 18 years ago, do you have the records of what Fitz-James sent to you that he was just published anonymously? Yeah, because a lot of stuff he wrote was just one-off articles about things. Because he was a ghostwriter in one of Charles Dickens's things, right? Oh, I didn't read about that part. Was he? I think so. In his magazine or whatever. I'm the more I read about this guy, the more I'm just like, the thing that people keep saying about him is they're like, it's a shame that he died when he did, because if he had lived longer, we'd be studying this guy. Like, yeah. Because he kind of, after his death, his stuff kind of went out of the like circuit. I was like, this is what would have happened to Lovecraft if there had been no August Derleth, who swoops in right after Lovecraft dies and just starts printing his stuff like crazy, reprinting his stuff, writing expansions on his stuff, popularizing his stuff, getting it out there. if that had happened with O'Brien, if he had a Durleth, like right after he died, just pumping his stuff out, we would know more about, or have talked more about him, or be learning more about his writing, like studying his poetry.
Because his writing is fantastic.
He's so good. We haven't even gotten to the story.
We haven't gotten to the story. Is going to take up very little of this. It's very straightforward and very short.
But I just I want to know more about this guy.
He seemed like an awesome person. He was an abolitionist. Yeah. Like you've already mentioned that, but he called out the like rich people, like the nobility and stuff in England for not helping people during the famine.
And he had great friends.
Yeah, he
devoted friends who like went to his mother after he died. Like people went to visit her, to talk to her. But he was only really known. I mean, he was very well known at the time.
Yeah, I mean, his obituary says that he's one of the most like successful writers of the time.
Exactly, and not successful like what's his face who wrote The King in Yellow.
Yeah,
like just who wrote like some really brilliant stuff, but then mostly wrote just sort of popular trash that disappeared. Like Fitz-James O'Brien, people are just like, no, everything this guy writes is worthy of canonization. And unfortunately, he died young. He died at 35. Before he one of the things that they said is a few of his friends were all, yeah. And before he went off to war, he told a bunch of his, and like even during the war, he was like, I've been working on a major work, and I have it completely ready to go all up here. As soon as I return from the front, I'm writing my big work. Like he was ready. He was like, here it comes. I'm gonna write the thing that's gonna put me on the map. I've been writing it in my head for like a decade. Never got out. So somewhere in like whatever the fantastical library is of like unwritten works that like I can't remember who wrote about that. Like Umberto Eco or somebody. Somewhere that novel exists. That
and it's
James
brilliant,
O'Brien.
And the world is worse off for not having it.
So if any of you are traipsing through the Dreamlands and you come upon Dream's library, just look up Fitz-James O'Brien and find the novel he didn't write, because I really want to know what it is.
Same.
God, could you imagine? Like, it's just and
it's so sad.
But also, like, he died a hero. Like people are like, they're like, he did die how he wanted to, which is fighting for the Union, like fighting for his country.
And with a glass of sherry in his hand at the end.
Yep, and like seemingly with no regrets. He didn't seem to live with many regrets. He had a bohemian side. He wore the same like checkered coat every day, like checkered outfit. And one of his friends was like, for a long time, like those were the only checks we were familiar with. Like this checkered jacket. They're like, they said it's the checkered outfit that British guys are always shown wearing in farces. Like that's how you knew a British guy was there, because it's like the guy in the checkered coat. Yeah, he was a character, big mustache.
I looked at some of the like drawings and stuff that were done of him, like the caricatures and stuff, and they're fun.
Yeah, and according to William Winter, William Winter didn't meet him until he had gone through some stuff, and he was like, in his later years, he didn't look that great. Like life kind of got to him. He had been roughed up a little bit. He wore his destitution on his skin. But they're like, when he'd smile, like all of a sudden, like they're like they were like, he was an Irish wit, but not like with a bunch of puns and wordplay like people thought of Irish wit at the time.
He was born in a place called Limerick.
Well, he was born in Limerick. Right. But they were like, he was that like sort of like dry, subtle, like just the way he used words. They were like, he was so funny, a good sense of humor. And I think we've talked a lot about him now.
Yep.
What was it?
What was it? We've already talked about what it was. It's an invisible ghoul.
An invisible ghoul. What's today's story?
Today's story is What Was It by Fitz-James O'Brien.
Yes.
It's a story that made me sad at the end.
It did make you sad at the end. Made me sad at the end. And not because anything bad happens to the main character.
But because something sad happens to the creature.
Who's not a good creature.
No, it is a terrible creature.
Yeah. So this story was originally published in 1859. And what did David Hartwell have to say about old Fitzy here?
He said that he is the heir apparent to Poe in America. I think he was called the something Poe at some point.
The Irish Poe?
Yeah, something like that.
The muscly Poe?
the gymnast Poe.
The gymnast Poe.
It, according to our good old editor, it is a story substantially ahead of its time. I did read a bit about a couple of the other stories that he wrote, and the Wondersmith was what stood out to me, because it's about robots being made that then turn on their creators, and I thought that was fun for the time period.
Oh, and the Diamond Lens.
Yeah,
was another
that's
one of
the
his...
one where the guy falls in love with the microscopic creatures, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, Harper's Magazine, March 1859 is where this first appeared. I looked it up. I looked at the original publication. It is that thing where it's like magazine, which means it was this thick.
Yep.
And like tiny print in columns.
Mm-hmm.
And this one article just runs right into the next one. So it's like, it just goes da-da-da-da-da-da. What was it? Da-da-da-da-da. And it's actually called What Was It? A Mystery. Because I think if people didn't see the A Mystery, they'd be like, I don't know, editor. What was it? Because it didn't have his name or anything on it.
Yeah.
It just said what was. I think you have to look at the table of contents to see his name. But yeah, 1859, considered by some to apparently be the first invisible guy story or visible thing. I have to believe something invisible existed in fiction before this.
Hopefully.
But I keep reading stuff that's like, I think a lot of people just read each other's stuff, so they keep repeating things about, like, so one person wrote it's the first invisible guy, so everyone just kind of like reiterates that.
That's kind of what happens when there's not a lot of sources on something. It's like that one time when somebody edited a Wikipedia page, and then the Wikipedia page cited that person as if that they had gotten the information from them, and then it was just a loop of misinformation.
So, what is this story about? Like, what happens in this story? It's pretty short.
The story is about our narrator. Do we ever get a name for our narrator? Harry.
Yeah, and for many, Harry S. Scott. Because Harry S. Scott, there was a story he wrote called The Pot of Tulips.
Yeah.
In 1855. And I believe the main character is named Mr. Escott in that story, I think is how it works. The narrator in this story references having written a story called The Pot of Tulips.
Okay.
And we know this guy's name is Harry. So people are like, well, Harry Escott is the author of The Pot of Tulips and of What Was It? And so they're called like the Harry Escott stories, but that's literally it. Like they don't have much other connection between the two of them.
Harry, our main character, is a guy who lives with a bunch of other tenants in a house. The story starts with a description of the house, which was owned by a financial guy who was caught, a New York merchant who was caught in bank fraud, who then fled to Europe and died of a broken heart.
Which is, I don't understand what that even means. Like, of all the things to die from after fleeing,
he got caught with fraud and died of a broken heart. But after he died, supposedly his house started getting haunted, 26th Street. And I was like, okay, that's fine. But then it starts getting haunted, right? And I'm like, by a man. But then it starts talking about, like, skirts and a bunch of other things, and I was like, what is going on?
Yeah, let's talk about the fact that there's a lot of supernatural stuff that's brought up in the beginning and throughout that has seemingly nothing to do with what actually happens in this house.
It seems like it's a story, like a house that's meant to like sound haunted but actually isn't, because nobody can like live in it. Like a caretaker and his wife moved out. But it really seemed like it only started like getting picked up after the original story came out. So people were probably just like, oh, we can't actually afford this house. We need to find a way to like get out of having it. But
also what I love is no one can live in the house. So it goes up for sale and it gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And the tenant's landlady, Mrs. Moffat, buys this haunted house for cheap and then moves all of her tenants across town into
she's
it.
Like,
and I love that most haunted house stories are like, I'm moving my family into this haunted house because we can only afford it. I love I'm moving all my tenants into a haunted house because it's cheap.
But also, it's like, she's like, I think you guys would like this haunted house because it seems like what you guys would be into.
Yeah, and only 2 people bow out. Only 2 people are like, we'll just go somewhere else.
Yeah, and you know what? They really do like the haunted house. It's that thing where, like, if you move a bunch of people into a haunted house and they want it to be haunted, nothing is gonna happen.
Right.
Because that's exactly what happens.
There's 2 things these people like. They like haunted houses, and they like smoking the ope.
Well, there's only 2 of them like smoking opium, right?
Yes. Our hero and his
Dr.
best buddy,
Hoffman.
Dr. Hammond.
Hoffman is another human being who actually existed.
Yes. Tales of E.T.A. You're thinking of E.T.A. Hoffman, the author of The Nutcracker and many great horror stories, including The Nutcracker. Yeah, they're opium smokers. And again,
I thought
you think that might come into play.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be like, oh, was it really just the opium? It's not.
It certainly is. It gets. In fact, there's many versions of this story in reprints that just cut all the mentions of opium entirely. They are like, it gets Bowdlerized a little bit, and they're like, we don't want to see people who just happily, casually, recreationally taking drugs, it's basically they're just smoking out every night.
Yeah,
they're intelligent guys. They're very educated. They
just want to be happy.
Yeah, they're like, we don't overdo it. We're not like overindulging in it. We do a little bit at a time, and we just have like big philosophical conversations.
Yeah.
They're just a couple of young guys smoking dope and talking about stuff.
Yeah, and it's all positive stuff because they don't want their dreams to get infiltrated by ghosts and ghouls.
Right.
But like one night things take a little bit of a darker turn for whatever reason, and our main character's like, I'm gonna go to bed.
Well, because they have a book. That they've all been like sharing around, The Night Side of Nature. Yeah. By Catherine Crowe. And
which is an awesome name.
I picked up a copy of it for 99 cents.
Yeah.
Started reading it. Catherine Crowe was a scientific spiritualist. She was a spiritualist, but she was like, you got to be able to explain this stuff with science. Science is new. Like, science is, and she was like, people used to believe in everything. Then in the 18th century, they stopped believing in anything. It's the 19th century now. Time for us to like find a halfway point. Yeah. Where we use science to prove that the supernatural exists and why it exists. And that's what this book is.
I love this movement in general. I love the movement in the 1800s. I think it's awesome.
And so she wrote this book, The Night Side of Nature, which is basically like based on a German expression that's like that's used to mean like the other side, like the dark side. And the unseen world. The stuff we covered in that other story, was it Night Side? The Night Side?
I think so.
Yeah, Night Side. I think that was what it was called. Night Side. And as I'm reading the intro, it's a long book. I'm sort of skipping through it, but there's a lot of like spooky stories in it. And she says in the intro, she's like, I'm not writing this so you can just sit around and read spooky stories. This is a scientific work. Yep. But I think a lot of people just read it because it had a lot of great case studies in it. But she was a paranormal investigator, and it's a real book. You could get it for 99 cents on Kindle. Highly recommend picking it up. So that's a real book. They mention Zanoni by Edward Bulwer Lytton, which is an occult novel, and they mention Wyland or the Transformation, an American Tale, by Charles Brockden Brown, which is considered the first American Gothic novel. So there's a lot going on here. As far as like the influences on this story and and what it's trying to say. Yeah.
But Harry gets a bit freaked out, so he's like, I'm going to go to bed because I don't want this to continue. And you're like, okay, like supernatural stuff's about to happen. Because he mentions at the beginning something horrible happening on this night. I thought something was going to happen to Hammond after he left. But he gets into
like maybe bed. Maybe he sees the ghost of his lover.
Because Well, because they're talking about, like, the question that comes up is, what do you think the, like, paragon of fear is, or whatever?
Right. That's their big question. Like, what's the scariest thing?
Yeah.
Which is exactly what you would talk about with your friend while you're smoking out.
What do you consider to be the greatest element of terror?
Yeah. Like, is it a story you've read or something? And he's like, look, dude, I've seen corpses floating down the river. Like, I've seen pretty scary stuff. It's going to take a lot.
Yeah. And he goes to bed, and as he's laying in bed, he gets set upon by a creature.
He wakes up, something drops onto his bed, grabs him by
chest.
Grabs him by the throat. It's basically the that painting of The Nightmare.
Yeah, that's on the cover of all the Frankenstein novels.
Yeah, and like the cover like gothic and with the little creature sitting on the woman's chest. Yeah. It's that creature.
Except for it's invisible.
And it's pitch black in the room. So something's strangling him.
Yeah, and like, he manages to get it. He manages to like wrestle it off and like pin it and use a handkerchief to like tie its hands together or something.
Because remember, Fitz-James O'Brien, what is he?
A gymnast.
He's strong. Which is one of the reasons people consider this character to be Fitz-James O'Brien writing himself.
Unless he just like was so out of touch with reality that he assumed anyone could do this.
Everyone was strong. So, being a human being, I was incredibly fit.
Yeah. And all of the like struggle and stuff has brought everyone to his door. And he's sitting there and he's holding this creature. He turns the gaslight on and he like screams. And everyone's like, what's going on? He's like, there's an invisible creature. And everyone's like, the hell are you talking about?
And I love the idea of this guy, this like rough, tough, burly guy, this wrestler guy. A guy with like, who's like been a pugilist. He's got a big mustache. He's wrestling something in his room. He grabs it. He gets its hands bound and he reaches over, flips on the light. He's holding nothing and he's all, and everyone just coming, like bursting into his room. Like, what? He's like, I've got an invisible man. There's an invisible guy in my bed.
And Hammond's like, what the hell are you talking about? You've smoked too much opium.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, I'm serious. Come touch it. And Hammond comes over and touches it and he's like, oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no.
And I love how everyone else just kind of slowly backs out of the room.
Yeah. And he's like, you guys have to believe us. And they're like, no, we don't believe you, but we're not going to believe you by touching it because that would break away our barriers of understanding. He's like, fine, here's what I'll do. And he throws it on the bed and the bed like shifts and everyone's like, why have you done this?
They restrain it, they tie it down, it's on the bed, and there it shall stay.
Yeah.
Because they can tell it's breathing.
And he can feel his heartbeat.
And they feel it all over, and they're like, well, it's roughly humanoid, but I sure do wish we knew exactly what this thing looked like.
Yeah. And he's
Call in your plaster of Paris pal.
Call in your anonymous doctor. They cut his name out for some reason.
Yeah, he does like the Dr. S blank.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he probably was like, I don't want this guy to get people to like bother my friend who, by the way, chloroforms the invisible monster.
Yep. So they can cast it in plaster.
Which I guess means that like had to like do the thing where you like put tubes in the nose and like put Vaseline or petroleum jelly all over the skin because that thing's got to breathe. But yeah, they make a plaster cast of the thing and are like, oh, it's a ghoul.
Yeah, it's a 4-foot-tall, ghoulish man creature.
Yeah.
With like and they're like, face. What is happening? And the landlady... What?
Oh, no, go ahead.
And everyone's like, get rid of it. Kill it. And they're like, but we don't want to just kill it.
Yeah. And the landlady's like, you two get out. And they're all, okay, but we're leaving this here.
Yeah.
And she's all, you can stay.
They're like, yeah, of course. And they're like trying to figure out what to do with it. They're trying to feed it, but it won't eat anything. And they're like, this is like, we don't know what to do here. And they just kind of like have to watch it starve to death. Because it's a dangerous creature. It tried to kill somebody.
Right. And if it's a ghoul, it's only going to eat dead humans.
Yeah. or living humans that it then murders.
That it's killed. Yeah, it's gonna. But apparently, it's not eating anything they offer it. I assume that means it's gonna try. It only wants to eat people. But you're right. It's dangerous, but it's at this point now it's just pathetic and sad because it's this dying man being that they don't want to die.
Yeah.
Like, it's still a living thing, and they're just kind of wigged out by it. Nobody wants to really talk about it. It's just kind of this sad thing in the bedroom. And yeah, it just slowly over weeks starves to death.
12 days. A fortnight, that's what it is.
And they have to bury this invisible thing in the backyard.
And its cast was given to Dr. X.
who has a museum of the unknown across the street.
And then our narrator's like, also, I'm going on a journey and I might never come back. Goodbye.
I just had to write this down because boy, oh boy, was this an upsetting thing that happened.
Yeah.
And that's the story. And I finished it and I was so sad for everyone involved. Just because this thing starts out so horrific and weird and then it just becomes like just sad. It's just sad. I just felt sad. It's also scary. It's also a pretty spooky
really
story.
Yeah. I was like, when it first came from the ceiling, I was like, ugh, literary jump scare.
Yes. Yeah. I was like, oh no. And again, very short.
Yes. It's only like 8-7 pages.
Yeah. And oh boy, does it pack a lot into those few pages.
Yeah.
I think every like audio recording of it is like 25 to 30 minutes long. Like it's just, it's a quick read. So I read because I have to, a article about this story, called, from 2008, published in 19th Century Gender Studies, by Joyce L. Huff of Ball State University, called "The Domesticated Monster, Freakishness and Masculinity in Fitz-James O'Brien's What Was It?" And one thing that Joyce Huff talks about in it is the transition, and this sort of has to do with the time period as well, and masculinity and gender and sexuality, but the transition of the creature from, and I found this fascinating, from monster to freak, from being a threat to just being an object of curiosity. And at first I was like, what do you mean? Like, what's the difference between, and because she defines monster and she defines freak, and they're very similar, but the freak being a monster that you've essentially domesticated, that you've looked at and you've explored, and now it's not a monster anymore. Now it's just something that's different. And now you just got to look at it. And you just got to, it's just there to remind you of how awesome and human you are and that it's not.
Yeah.
And how that happens to, of course, this creature in the story. It goes from being this terrifying thing to just this pathetic, weird thing that then gets literally sold to a freak show at the end. And I don't know, I found that just added to the tragedy of the story for me.
Yeah.
And also the way the story explores masculinity. And apparently this story is considered by many, it's included in a couple of vampire collections.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that, because it really did feel like a vampire story, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah.
Just the way that the creature's described and what the creature's like the throat focus, the paleness of the creature.
Dracula's
it felt like a
Guest.
Nosferatu.
Yeah, there's a collection called Dracula's Guest, a connoisseur's collection of Victorian vampire stories. But there's also a collection it's in called A Spectrum Unseen, Invisible Men, Women, and Creatures in Classic Science Fiction Fantasy. But yeah, apparently many writers, a lot of editors consider this story like kind of a hybrid or like a bridge between like horror and fantasy and vampirism, because yes, it attacks a man in his bed, goes for the throat, is like, it's not a traditional vampire, but it's vampiric in a way. I don't know, I found that an interesting I was like, oh, I hadn't even thought about that.
And it involves like a house and all of that kind of stuff. I don't know. It feels very like if the story was expanded, it would be like kind of like a gothic vampire tale.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's obviously there's elements of the gothic in it.
Yeah, there's the big house. There's the
Yep.
there's the stimulating conversations.
Right.
The theme of like, what are you afraid of? The only thing that's missing is a woman in a long white dress. But even like the skirts and the noises and stuff are mentioned.
Yeah. It's so wild that it's been put into vampirism, the gothic. It's in a century of science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
It's in a collection called Terrifying Ghost Stories. And collections of various collections of weird tales.
Yeah.
So it's like nobody knows what to do with this. And it is
what was it?
What was it? What was it? Was it a ghost? Was it a vampire? Was it a ghoul? Was it something from another universe? Oh yeah, because another person's like, it's kind of like the bridge that serves as like sort of an inspiration for Lovecraft's The Beyond, which is a science fiction tale about there's things that are unseen to us that are always around us in like a universe next door. Is this thing an extra dimensional being that just sort of fell through, like in Dreams in the Witch House? Is it the house itself that like allows things to just sort of fall through? Like, was this thing just like going about its day and then was like, whoa, like fell down? And next thing, and it was in some guy's bed and it was like, like, is that what happened? We will never know.
What was it?
What was it?
A good story is what it was.
I was going to say, it was a dang good story is what it was.
Yeah.
I really liked this story.
So did I. And I liked learning about the guy. I like learning about good old Fitz.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I liked learning about him. I feel it's one of those weird things where I feel better having information about him in my life now.
Yeah. He seems just like a great guy.
Yeah. And if not, like, I mean, from what I read, there's like, he may have done some not so great things in his life. And I don't know what. People just make reference to like, I think he may have gotten kicked out of a couple of bars in his day.
He had a mean right hook.
He had a mean right hook. I mean, he did get
he got in some trouble while he was like in the army and stuff as well, but
yeah, but he did some amazing things while he was in the army as well. And had an interesting life. Like, I wish we knew more about him.
Yeah.
I wish these letters about him had been written soon after he died, as opposed to like, oh, it's been 18 years. Let me just dredge up. But there's enough evidence in those letters that even 18 years later, it brought up just this huge well of emotions in all these guys.
Yeah.
He was called manly a lot of manliness, but I think manliness in the sense of just like that sort of 19th century meaning of the term.
Yeah.
Not macho, but like he was appropriately manly. He had a big mustache. He had muscles. And he would cry at the drop of a hat, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. If you know that there's always that question that people are asked, like as like an icebreaker or whatever, like if you could meet someone dead or alive and like have a conversation with them, who would it be? I think this guy would be in my contenders for that.
Yeah, I at least I would just love to know what book he was going to work on had he not.
Tell me about your book.
What was the book? Fitz, what were you gonna write? He was like, it's gonna be about a scientist who built a guy out of parts, and I couldn't get it to work. It's gonna be about a vampire who came to London, and he was on a boat. It was a whole thing. I just never got around to putting it on paper. What if he was like what if you asked him and he exactly describes Game of Thrones? And he's like, and I have it all the way to the ending. All I got to do is write it down. Like,
no, it'll never be completed.
It'll never be completed. Fitz-James O'Brien, a lost author. So that was, what was it?
And it was awesome.
And it was an invisible ghoul. Yeah, check it out. Go go to archive.org and check out the poems and stories of Fitz-James O'Brien just to read those letters. Mm-hmm. There's just so much in them that are just amazing. Again, I got all choked up reading them. But what is next in the fabulous, formless darkness?
Shirley Jackson's The Beautiful Stranger.
Now, this is our second Shirley Jackson, right?
I believe so. Let me check.
The Country People, I believe, was Shirley Jackson.
Was that The Summer People?
The Summer People. I was thinking of Good Country People.
Yep.
The Summer People. That's right.
That was
so this is our second SJ. I just rewatched House on Haunted Hill. Or Haunting of Hill House.
The Haunting of Hill House. Every time.
Every time. I just rewatched Haunting of Hill House. So I am in the mood for more Shirley Jackson in my life. I also rewatched because I've been watching all the Twilight movies, and then I watched Haunting of Hill House. The mom from who plays Esme, the head of Esme Cullen, the head of the Cullens in Twilight, is in The Haunting of Hill House.
Mm-hmm.
And that got me all like psyched. So I watched the Mike Flanagan's Ouija movie, Origin of Evil, in which she is the mom, which is a great movie, by the way. Ouija, not a great movie. Ouija, Origin of Evil, the sequel prequel. Great movie. It's Mike Flanagan. He knows what he's doing, but it's also got it's also peppered with Hill House people in it too. There's like a few Hill House actors in it. So that's always fun. That's always fun. Also, just read the cesarean section scene in Breaking Dawn. So that was fun as well. I do enjoy, there's so much body horror in the Twilight books that don't get enough credit. Good stuff. I'm having a good time with those.
Apparently this could potentially be a parody of Gothic romance, which I'm very excited about.
Which you are very excited. How much surviving Gothic writing is a parody of Gothic writing?
A lot.
A lot. I assume that it's a lot. And people don't realize it as they're reading it.
And a lot of my favorite Gothic writing is parody of Gothic writing, because I love when things don't take itself too seriously.
But also, you only get that it's a parody if you know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Otherwise, everyone takes it at face value. It's either a parody of Gothic writing, or it's like a deconstruction and a commentary on the Gothic.
Yep.
Oh no, you don't understand. She was taking the Gothic and doing something new with it,
mm-hmm.
but now we just think this is the Gothic. Oh, fun stuff.
Also, there's a fun word in the description of this piece called horrorpolation, which is not a real word, but I'm excited about it.
Was that a word made up by David G. Hartwell?
Yeah.
Oh, David G. Hartwell, you do my heart well. Also, our episode on the King in Yellow, on the Repair of Reputations, was listened to by Kenneth Haidt,
mm-hmm.
the author of the King in Yellow annotated edition.
Yep.
Much to my horror, I guess he was googling the annotated King in Yellow, and he came across the fact that I mentioned it, I guess, in the description of the episode. So he publicized it far and wide. He was like, you gotta listen to this. I was so honored. I was so moved and touched by the fact that he would do that. Also, really happy we didn't say any terrible things about his book. It's a great book. You should go and buy it. I guess paperback editions are coming out now. It's going into
really?
I think it's going to go into a more freely available edition. If I'm not mistaken. So if it does, grab it. I grabbed a $28 PDF. No regrets, because I keep going back to that thing. It's amazing. It's amazing. So thank you, Kenneth Haidt, for putting us out there.
Yes, thank you for that.
If you ever want to be on the show, let me know. We'll talk to an expert. I love talking to experts.
Yeah, experts are fun.
Yeah. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining us. Sorry, I am
also here. I'm a shark.
You're also here. You're a shark. Dab. Well, just because I'm a cowboy doesn't mean I can't.
Dab. Conquer anger through gentleness.
Conquer anger through gentleness. So that's me. And join us next time for a little Shirley Jackson.
Yeah.
And I'm Phil.
And I'm Willow.
And we'll see you when
it's
Del Toro time. Bye-bye.